Okay, Brenda, shall I pass over to you as chair?
Okay, right. It's a good job I'm not a drinking person. May I welcome you all to this meeting? And the agenda that I received, I have the hard copy, didn't have an item at the beginning for welcome and apologies. So I have apologies thus far from Andrew, Rob and Beverly. I think unless Kieran or Matthew, you have any others?
Not from me. What I should say, though, is looking at the members, we need to take Emma Hartdyke out of the list, just for the record. Emma's stepped down from Schools Forum and it's now Sharon Roberts. Yeah,
that's fine. Well, it's correct on the agenda. It was just the email that went out. I'd like to, you've all met Matthew now, so we would like to welcome Matthew. And in at the deep end, I think. I think. And she joined the forum in 2018. And she in July this year have produced so I'd like to call thanks to her for the excellent support she gave to the forum during that time. And I'd like to move on to Rob. Rob walked into this meeting. Sadly, it's his final meeting because he is apparently leaving Carew, and he's going, I think, in February. And so he was hoping to come tonight, but he's decided to help out by taking some students up to London to see the Christmas lights. So he's been, first of all, a substitute for the special school academies on the forum, and then he became a permanent member. So we'd like to thank him for the 4 years that he was part of this forum. So I think that's all my notices. So what I'd like to do now is, we all know what category you're on the forum, but I think it would be quite helpful for Matthew as a newcomer if we just say what our background is. Well, no. For myself, my example is I'm chair of Overton Grange. So if I ask Matthew to go down the list, invite you to speak, just to say which school you are on, if you're on another governing body, if you're on two, say whatever it is that you're on. So over to you, Matthew.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Just to confirm, we are now live streamed. So right on cue, I can just introduce myself. Chair, I may have missed this a moment ago. Apologies if so, but we've received apologies of absence from
yes, Dr.
Got that? Excellent. Okay. So, Chair, I believe we have Anne Arnold on the call. Did you want, Chair, apologies, did you want Anne to introduce herself or just list them off?
If you just take everybody down the list, Matthew, then you can, I've asked people to just say which schools they're either a head of or a chair of or whatever. And so if you could take everybody one by one.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Chair. We've got Anne Arnold, if she'd like to just introduce.
Yeah, apologies. I'm a member of the public. I'm not a member of the forum. I'm trying to find the live link on the website. I've sent this link. I think you sent it to me, Matthew, to join the meeting, but I shouldn't be on this link. I should be on the live stream link, really.
That's okay, Anne. What I'll do, Anne, is in a moment, I'll drop in the chat box here a link to the YouTube link where we're being live streamed, and then you can follow us from there.
Thank you.
Okay. We've got Bob Harrison.
Yeah, evening all. Bob Harrison, Services Director at Cognos.
Thank you. We've got Carol Cook.
Good evening. I'm Carol Cook. I'm chair of the Cirrus Multi-Academy Trust and sit on this group as an academy governor, but I'm also chair of Hackbridge and Spencer.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Jane Pascoe.
Hi, I'm the councillors sit as observers.
Thank you. And we've got Councillor Jenny Batt.
Yep, Councillor Jenny Batt, one of the vice chairs of the People Committee and also an observer.
Thank you. We've got, beg your pardon, Emma Walford.
Hi, I'm here as nursery rep, but I am also the head of Hackbridge as well as Spencer Nursery.
Thank you. We've got Fiona Phelps.
Yes, hello. Fiona Phelps, Assistant Director of Education and SEND, and just here as a participant, but not a member.
Thank you. We've got Havard Spring.
Eventually, I'm head of Foresters Primary School, and I'm a maintained head teacher rep for primary.
Thank you. We've also got Jane Knowles.
Matthew, I think Jane Knowles should be here as a member of the public, so I hope she's now found her way through to the website.
Okay, thank you, Carol. We've got Jenny Sims. I'll just give Jenny a second. Whilst she's coming back, we've got Joanna Cassie.
Good evening, colleagues. Joanna Cassie, Managing Director of Cognos.
Thank you. We've got Kieran Holiday.
Hi, Matthew. Yep, Kieran Holiday, Head of Pupil-Based Commissioning at the London Borough of Sutton.
Thank you. We've got Laurie Smith.
In fact, you haven't got Laurie Smith, you've got Sue Smith. It just comes up as Laurie, but I'm Sue Smith. I'm from Sutton Teachers Committee, but I'm also chair of Culver's House Primary School.
Thank you, and thanks for explaining that. Nathan Cole.
Hello, I'm the head of Wilson's in Wallington, and I'm here as a secondary academy rep.
Thank you. And Peter Nowdy.
Hi, it's actually Peter Nowdy. I'm head of Cheam High School, and I'm an academy secondary school head teacher. I've also got
Callett. Hello, everyone. I'm the CEO of Cheam Academies Network, and that consists of Cheam High School and Oaks Park High School, and I'm an academy rep too.
Thank you both. Richard Booth.
Hi, I'm the head teacher at Wallington High School for Girls, and I'm a secondary academy rep.
Thank you. Sharon Roberts.
Hi, I'm the CEO of Cirrus Primary Academy Trust and Vice Chair of Hackbridge Primary School, and I'm an Academy Primary rep.
Sue Holmes.
Hi, I'm Strategic Finance Business Partner for Education and DSG.
And I'll just come back to Jenny Sims. No. Perhaps, Chair, perhaps Joanna Cassie could just advise who Jenny Sims is if that's okay.
So Jenny is a governor at a school and also a B shareholder on the Cognos board. Jenny's just said here, it says her mic is on. Matt, I don't know if you want to bring her in. She's said in the chat bar.
Yeah, if you can come in, Jenny, if we can hear you, that would be excellent. If not, you might need to refresh your page and kind of come back into the meeting. That sometimes helps with the microphones. We'll give that a try. Jenny, I don't know if your microphone's working.
I was just going to say she is. Just to say that Jenny's on as a maintained primary school governor rep.
Excellent, thank you. I think, Chair, perhaps I'll try and see if I can give Jenny a hand as we move on, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered that item, thankfully. I'd like to just refer you to the notes of the meeting, of the offline meeting that we had on the 6th of October. I think that's self-explanatory, and I will just ask if there are any matters arising, because I don't think we can do anything other than agree the notes that were circulated with these papers. Okay, so are there any matters arising that we're not covering elsewhere on the agenda?
Chair, there's an item I'd like to raise, which could be matters arising or an AOB, just in relation to COVID. I'm happy to talk about that now, or it could be that it makes more sense to talk about it as an AOB at the end of the meeting.
Okay, if you can remember to raise it, Kieran. Yep.
Yep,
good.
That's fine.
Okay, all right. So no one else, I can't see any other hands, and Matthew's not telling me that there's a hand raised. So I'll move on to the revenue report, and that is enclosure 4A. So I think that's you, Kieran.
Yes, that's me. Thank you, Brenda.
And before we start, I'm assuming, because the papers were sent out in good time, that everyone has actually read the papers. So if officers could work on that assumption, that would be helpful, particularly as we had a late start. Okay, over to you, Kieran.
Thank you, Chair. That's fine. So we would normally take the revenue report from Sue Holmes first before we start thinking about the next financial year. But given that there are some decisions on the agenda which affect the next financial year, I thought it'd be useful just to give a summary of the emerging budget position or for the DSG for 21-22. It's emerging because we've only had provisional allocations for next year, not confirmed allocations, and we haven't worked through all of the DSG blocks completely yet, in the sense that early years there is still more work to do. So the figures in the draft budget in enclosure 4A are very much draft, and they absolutely will change, but I thought it would be useful to start the discussion with a summary of what the position is looking like next year. So as colleagues know, the DSG is split into 4 different blocks: the schools block, central services block, high needs block, and early years block. And what I'll do is I'll just, what we've been looking at what our likely income is going to be for next year and what our likely expenditure is going to need to be next year. And I'll give a quick summary against each block. So if I start with the schools block, for anyone who doesn't know, the schools block is the block of funding that we get in from the government, which is delegated pretty much directly to schools as part of their delegated budgets. It's governed by the national funding formula, of which Sutton is now fully on. So we're now, all of our schools are funded fully on the national funding formula factors. Based on this year's national funding formula factors, but last year's census data, because we haven't had the allocation for this year, we're going to receive about 175 million, of which 122 will go to academies directly, leaving 54 million for maintained schools. With respect to, well, colleagues will know that we have growth funding as part of the schools block, and the allocation of growth funding is a schools forum decision. based on the additional growth we're expecting for September 2021, we expect to provide about 180k in growth funding next year. And Schools Forum have previously agreed to provide a contribution from the schools block to the central services block. Last year, I think it was about 210 or in that order. We'll be requesting 287 this year, which I'll come on into in a second, and Sue will touch on in her paper as well. So the other thing to say here is that in addition to that, we said that we would fund the predictable needs funding for mainstream schools as part of the high needs block from unallocated growth, which we did last year, and we will propose to do again this year. So we'd be looking to distribute 500,000 of the unallocated growth funding for that purpose, and 250k to continue to fund the Senko clusters that have been set up. So we expect there to be a small surplus next year in the schools block of about 300k. Moving on to the central services block. A central services block is that which relates to central costs in the local authority, whether they're historic or ongoing. I think Schools Forum have previously recognised this as a block that was previously in deficit because the government is looking to reduce the funding that comes into this block when a number of those costs are fixed and we can't do anything about. So last year, as I said, there was 210,000 that was put into the central services block from the schools block, and we'd be looking for 287,000 this year, and that increase is to reflect the increasing costs of statutory services to the local authority. Now, much of that increase relates to central provision, and what I would say is that alongside that growth on statutory services, the council is or officers have put forward a growth request to the council from the general fund of about 530,000, which is a lot of that is down to the increasing number of education, health and care plans and the capacity that we need to manage that. So if you like, whilst that is an additional contribution, it's modest in the context of the general fund increase. On the high needs block is the most complicated of the funding blocks in across the DSG. As you know, the high needs block funds all high needs costs relating to pupils with additional needs. So it covers all of our placements in special schools, bases, non-maintained independent provision, therapies. It provides funding for all of our SEN support services, our alternative provision, and so on. And this is the budget that's been under pressure for a number of years. And it's the budget that is probably the most volatile of all of the DSG budgets. I think what I've tried to summarise in the paper is on the table rows A to E, in the paper A to E, with corresponding rows in the budget are those lines which are don't change in year or don't change significantly in a year, and we don't expect in-year pressures on those budgets in the main. The rest of the budget lines in the breakdown, which is in the appendix, are those budget lines where we know we have pressures in year. So that's typically when we have additional EHCPs agreed or additional costs associated with young people with additional needs throughout the year. Now, we've had a look at, and I won't go through the detail of the methodology unless anyone wants me to, what the budget looks like next year based on an exercise of rolling forward those pupils that are currently in placements, looking at transition points, but then also adding in an allowance for additional placements next year, and what that would mean in the context of what our likely income is. And the nub of it is, if you allow for 17 additional EHCP plans based on an average cost of an education, health and care plan throughout the next financial year, we'd have to make sure that we were putting aside about £3 million for additional placements. Now, we have and will receive £3.4 million extra, there or thereabouts, in our high needs block next year But having done the exercise that I've just described, and in making that allowance of £3 million for additional placements throughout the whole of next year, we are at the moment we have a shortfall in terms of what our expected expenditure is and what our likely income is. So the table indicates that we've got a 1.3 million funding gap at the moment on the high needs block, or a shortfall. But of course, that does assume that we're going to need all of that 3 million. So it's not necessarily the case that we're going to need all of that 3 million, and we'll talk later on in the agenda about some of the things we're trying to do to help look at how we manage the high needs block in the future. But I think it's important to understand that in the context of decisions later on in the agenda. And what I'd say is that, and as the paper makes clear, that £1.3 million gap doesn't include any increases that we might want to provide in top-ups for our specialist provision in the borough. It doesn't include potential inflationary pressures in the NMI sector, and we know that that can be a pressure. It doesn't include any of the pressures arising from the Fair Access Protocol, which is on the agenda tonight, or the Year 11 placements budget, which we know has overspent in the past, as well as early years predictable needs funding that we would like to put in place if we can, to mirror what's happening in the mainstream part of the high needs block review. So I thought it would be helpful for people to understand that summary before we go on to the other items. It's not for decision tonight. We'll take the budget, the actual budget, DSG budget, will be signed off in February next year. But I thought we have done some early work on it, and I thought it would be useful for people to understand that before we move on. I'll stop there.
Any questions or comments from anyone, please? Okay, Kieran, do you want to look at the conclusions at the back that you've asked us to have a look at? Does anyone have any objections to these areas that Kieran has highlighted on the back page? No. Okay. Okay. So I think it would be reasonable, Kieran, now to... Oh, Nathan.
I don't have an objection. I just had a question, Kieran. So when you say that if there was a temporary contribution to the FAP issue from the schools block, would that be from growth funding?
Yeah, I think yes. My view would be, if we are to find funding for FAP, it should come from growth funding in the schools block. I think the Year 11 placements budget comes from the high needs block, and we know that the budget there is 100k, but it's been spending more than that in previous years. So it would be sensible, I think, to increase that budget allocation in the high needs block for that particular part next year.
Thank you.
But Chair, if you don't mind me just saying, I think probably the bit I should pause on, which I didn't perhaps, and it's not necessarily for decision tonight, but there may be discussion on what the value of the increase in top-up should be for Sutton's specialist provision, because in the report it does say that we would generally recommend that there should be some increase for specialist provision, and we did provide that where we were able to last year, and I've suggested a 2% increase on top-ups in the paper. I'd welcome any thoughts on that particular part of the paper.
Any thoughts to put to Kieran on that from anyone, please? No one's objecting, Kieran, so maybe we could take that as a guide for you to go forward with.
Yep, I mean, but yeah, people can come back to me after the meeting if they want, but I will take that as a guide. That's useful. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, I think you've given us the background, so perhaps we could now move on to Sue's paper, 4B. Would that be okay, Sue?
That's fine, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my report, it's giving an update on the budget on the DSG budget for this year since the last report. It's showing the latest allocation, and Appendix A, it's giving the overall position as at month 7, which is October. We're currently working on month 8, so I couldn't provide those figures. So Appendix A is showing the overall position on the DSG, and then Appendix B shows the SEN summary. If anyone would like to have any comments on the budget for 2021, then I'll stop there before I move on to next year.
I can't see any hands.
Okay.
Right, carry on.
Okay, so the budget for 21-22, as Kieran said, we've only got provisional figures. There, two of the technical changes are that teachers' pay and pension grants that are currently paid out separately are now going to be included, or from next year will be included in the formula funding in the basic entitlement factor. And it's actually based on current year, as opposed to, it hasn't included any increases that or pay awards from September 20. So that's just something to consider. And also the Adulthood factors have been updated for 2019. The different blocks have had increases. The Central School Services block, as we've said before, is made up of historic items which the government are trying to wind down, and they have been reducing that block by 20%. They did give us an opportunity to actually provide evidence to actually avoid that decrease this year, and that was based on the termination of employment costs and potential borrowing. They're not covering those costs, but they're just not reducing our block, or they've said they won't reduce our block next year. So that's an effect of 102,000, so that's better than nothing. And then the ongoing elements of it are increased by 4%. As Kieran said, the schools block is about, well, with growth, the growth funding that we're expecting will be actually about 176 million, sorry. And although it's ring fenced, 0.5% can be transferred to other blocks with schools forum agreement. We've obviously are asking for a transfer of, I'm going to say up to 300,000, just because I don't know exactly how the figures will play out when we have actuals, from the schools block to the Central School Services block, as we've talked about before. But potentially there is 882,000 based on the provisional figures that could be transferred from the schools block to other blocks. So that might just be something that you might want to consider. And that doesn't need DFE approval. Delegated budget, we've looked at it, we've updated the factors, which are Appendix C, but it's based on the NFF. So it's just the amounts that have changed. The funding, the primary and secondary funding has been increased, and so the factors have been updated accordingly. But as I say, they are based on the NFF factors that are given by the DFE. Notional, not proposing to change the notional SEN funding. It's based the same as last year, or the current year, should I say, on 100% of the deprivation factors and 90% of low prior attainment. And the minimum funding guarantee will be 2%, so 1.84. So that's just to give you a few facts and figures on the budget for next year. But we should receive actual funding about the 18th of December, so just before Christmas.
Okay, so before I open it up, Sue, could you go to point 13, where you say the factors will be presented to the S&R committee for ratification? Whose decision are they ratifying? The DFE?
We just have to take the factor. It's an LBS, or Sutton has to agree to the factors in our formula, and it is a committee decision, but they are just ratified. It's just a requirement.
Yes, because
so,
normally we're proposing that, aren't we, from this committee, and then it goes to the P&R for ratification. But on this occasion, it's really a DFE decision, isn't it?
Well, it's actually a Sutton decision. We do it in consultation with the forum.
Yeah,
but it is actually, it's at the moment, because it's not a hard formula, the NFF will eventually, we're told, but it is continually, it has been delayed. It will be a DFE formula. We are basing it on the DFE formula, but it still has, needs local agreement. We do it in consultation, which, when we went to the NFF factors, we did that in consultation with the schools and the schools forum, but it is actually a committee decision.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you for clarification, Sue. Any comments or questions from anyone, please? Nathan has a hand up.
Sorry, just a quick question. So this it's a year ago, isn't it, since we talked about the movement of 0.5% of the schools block.
Yes.
And it's now here again.
Yeah.
Can you remind me what the impact is, if any, on the realisation of the national funding formula figures by doing this? Because as I remember, has to be schools agreement on this, doesn't there? Because although it's not a DFE decision, it requires our majority decision. So I just want to have that kind of reminded so that my colleagues don't lynch me tomorrow.
Right, to transfer funding from the schools block, it has to be a schools forum decision up to 0.5%. It doesn't actually affect the NFF. We're doing funding at NFF, so it's actually the balance of the schools block, which, because we are being funded quite generously on growth, which is part of the schools block, that is basically what has been used to transfer to other blocks. So we received, I think it's about 1.7 million, and we, a number of, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago, we did have a significantly higher growth funding, and it was rising, but a decision was made by the forum to cut it quite dramatically. So the growth funding that we provide as a borough is significantly lower than that provided by the DFE. So that gives us some flexibility within the schools block. But it isn't taking anything away from schools funding.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay, Peter Nowdy had hand up.
It's actually me, sorry, we're sharing. Right.
Oh, okay, right, Beck.
I just want to check, because at the beginning you talked about the schools block, and you talked about there was 1 million unallocated, and of which some was going from the growth fund in that into the Senco's predictable needs, and about 300k was going into the central services. So surely, if we take more than that 300k, aren't we starting to erode what's left? Because there isn't any spare after we've done that, is there? So if we took the 0.5%, as you're suggesting could happen, wouldn't that go beyond the 300k headroom and start to actually then take from the pot of money you need to distribute that formula?
Oh, we wouldn't. I was just saying that was up to 800. I mean, about 880,000 would be available. But if we are using sort of part of that for the predictable needs funding and Sencos, etc., then yes, I'm not suggesting we would take anything more than is unallocated.
Okay, so I just wanted to check that, because the way you described it in your paper, it was as if this money was available. But I think what you're actually saying is that up to 300k wouldn't affect the NFF, but beyond that, it wouldn't be as clear. Is that right?
I think because of the amounts Kieran put in his paper, yes. I mean, once we obviously wouldn't take any more. I suppose what I'm saying, we wouldn't take any more than 880, or we wouldn't be allowed to without going to the DFE. But once we've taken the 300 and other amounts have been, if that's what we're going to do, then yes, I'm not saying that that would be available to take. I was just saying that potentially is what you could do.
So just to check, we've all understood the same thing. So what you're saying is that there's potentially 800,000 that could be taken through the 0.5%, but that actually there's only available 300k roughly, given other commitments, without it starting to impact on the NFF. And your intention is to actually not ask for the 0.5% at this stage, but just to note that's a potential, but not actually what you're proposing. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, Kieran, you want to come in?
Yeah, I did actually, but Beck actually just covered exactly what I just wanted to clarify. So I lowered my hand as soon as it was said. So thank you.
All right. Okay. So are there any more questions or comments from anybody on Sue's paper? Okay, so if you look at the recommendations, I suppose I ought to read them out. To note the latest position on the DSG for 2021. Little 2 is to note the latest SEN funding position for 2021. And the next one is the key one, agree to transfer up to 300k from the schools block to the CSSB in 21-22, and note the NFF funding formula factors for 21-22. Can I ask if we note the first two, agree the third, and note the fourth? Is everyone happy? Okay, I should take silence as agreement. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Sue. Thank you for all the work that's gone into that. Now we move on to the high needs block review. That's you, Kieran, I think, again, unless Beck comes in at some point.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I'll make some introductory comments. I might ask Fiona and maybe Beck as well, who have also been involved in this as well. So again, I'll take the paper as read. Yes. So as I said in the introduction, we have used some of this year's growth funding to fund some of the work that we've wanted to do on the high needs block review. By way of update, we have made some good progress, I feel, on the high needs block review. All of our Senco clusters are set up. All of our lead clusters have been appointed. 3 of the cluster meetings have now taken place. Each of the 7 cluster lead SENCOs are leading on various aspects of the mainstream work that we're doing, such as rolling out provision mapping to all of the schools across the borough, and all schools across the borough have signed up to provision mapping, and really it's now about making sure that it's software that we're all using, as well as work streams around moderation and interfaces with statutory processes and transition and things like that. So the feedback from the clusters and the lead SENCOs has been generally good and positive. Lots of energy in the meetings to try and make some of the improvements that we're trying to make across the review. We'll be rolling out a new website in January and a new online community platform for SENCOs in January to help facilitate some of the discussions that are going on in those cluster meetings. We also, as forum colleagues will remember, we issued a send spend pro forma out to all of our mainstream schools to return so that we could share more information about how schools are using their notional SEN funding to support young people with additional needs in the mainstream setting. Now, I did actually include a little summary of some of those returns in the appendix to the paper. Not that I want to go through it in huge amounts of detail, but I think it is worth just pausing on it for a second. So on page 24 in the single pack or Annex A, I've just sort of summarised the returns that we've had from schools and some of the cumulative data that's come out of it. And I think personally, I think it has been I can't speak for schools, but it's been a useful exercise, I think, on behalf of the local authority. And I hope it's been a useful exercise for schools as well, in terms of really understanding how their notional funding is currently being deployed. We know that this is going to be a greater area of focus for Ofsted and other organisations like that. And it's quite rich as a resource for the clusters to look through and work through. What I would say is probably after this initial, because this is the first time we've done it, there's been a variable approach from schools in terms of how they filled out the pro forma, and there's probably some work we need to do and some training we perhaps need to do to bring as much consistency as we can to it. And I'm sure we'll be working on that through next year. But I mean, as you can see, some of the highlights in Annex A. So, majority of our schools are saying that their spend is greater than their notional budget, but not everyone is saying that. We've now got breakdowns of what the income coming into our schools is across both notional funding as well as pupil level funding for pupils with EHCs. Additional high needs funding will be added to this when we distribute predictable needs funding, but it also gives lots of breakdowns in terms of how different schools are using their notional funding. So what kind of administrative support do they have in place? What kind of teaching leadership and management do they have in place? And what support hours do they have in place? And it's that kind of information that's going to help, I think, the clusters in the work that they're doing. So we will continue to work on this, and I think it has been successful, and we will again be issuing the pro forma, certainly, I think, next year. And we'll have a bit of time, I think, as a result of that to do a bit of training, as I said. So I won't say anything more about notional send than that, because there's obviously quite a few diagrams there that I could explain in detail, but I've got a feeling you probably won't want me to. So, but by all means, come back with questions if you have them. Other things that are going on. So, colleagues, just to be clear, the send spend pro forma returns that have come in from schools for this year won't influence the predictable needs funding that we're looking to distribute this year, but it will start to influence how we allocate that funding in future years. And we did run through a rather complicated methodology for how we were proposing to distribute additional predictable needs funding in one of the previous schools forum meetings. We've just been waiting for the October census data to come in, so we now will distribute that 400,000 of additional predictable needs funding, which will all being well, go out in the January schools allocations, which is good. Other things that have been going on across the High Needs Block Review is we've developed a draft SEND charter, which Becca's been doing some work on with the Sutton Parent Carers Forum, which is good. And as part of this work, we've widened the scope a little bit in terms of setting up some working groups on early years and SEMH as well, and those groups are now up and running. That covers the mainstream. Preparation for adulthood, I'll try and be quick again. I'll assume you've read it all, but Una, who's working with us on that, has been doing some great work trying to build up our approach to preparation for adulthood in the local area, pulling together the various organisations across the voluntary sector and public sector, choice support, careers organisations, so that we can start to build a stronger offer than the one we have currently. And we'll be looking to do other things like recommissioning our independent travel training, and developing a route planner so that we're clearer on what those options are, and that'll all be going on next year as well. With respect to the recommissioning work stream, a lot of work has gone into that. It's quite a complex area, and we always knew that we'd be doing the mainstream and the PFA work, probably front loading that a bit and then coming on to the recommissioning work stream, but that belies the amount of work that's gone into that as well. So we've been talking to a lot of colleagues in the room, as well as across other special schools and the specialist sector in the borough, looking at how we commission places, why we're commissioning those places, what are the current pathways, how can we make them clearer, what are the funding arrangements that we want to be working towards in the future. But I won't say anything more than that, and we will certainly come back to Schools Forum once those proposals are worked up in detail. So that's a very kind of quick run through of Schools Forum. Of the High Needs Block Review. What I'd say is that you'll have heard from the previous reports that the High Needs Block being under pressure and being overspent both this year and in many previous years as well. Local authorities and local areas are now required to produce deficit recovery plans where parts of the DSG are overspending, and we haven't had to produce one yet, and there aren't many London authorities, I don't think, that aren't in that place. I think most London authorities now have been asked to produce a deficit recovery plan. I think we are definitely heading that way for next year, based on some of the forecasts we've talked about previously. But I think what's encouraging is, in many ways, the High Needs Block Review is in many ways a strategic approach to what a deficit recovery plan might look like. So it's certainly not a case that if the government does require us to do that we'll be starting from scratch in that sense. So we will see. We will certainly hear from the government next year if that is the case, and we'll come back to Forum if that is the case, obviously. But I thought it's worth mentioning that whether we like it or not, the government will be requiring us to consult with Schools Forum, as well as various other partner organisations across the local area, including the Parent Carers Forum, including schools, including Schools Forum, and so on, in the production of that deficit recovery plan. I will stop there.
Thank you, Kieran. Before I open it up, I appreciate this is a very well put together report, very comprehensive, and certainly is a tribute to everybody that's been involved in this. I think my only question, the last bullet point in 127, is, I know because we've looked at it over the years in the Formula Review Group about the recommissioning strategy, and although I understand it's a big piece of work, realistically, when do you think you will have some concrete proposals to put forward?
This is where me and Fiona and Beck might want to speak in absolute unison, but I think we're working towards trying to make proposals effective from September next year in terms of any changes to funding arrangements. That's what I think we're working towards. I'm going to ask Beck and Fiona to contradict me at this point if they disagree.
No, I don't disagree.
No, that's what we've talked about. Yeah.
Okay, good. good. I think it's important that we sort of try to aim for something like that timescale. Now, anyone else wish to make any comments or questions on this report? Havard.
Hi. Yeah, just a bit more of a comment for the forum, really. But looking at Kieran's paper, I think he's got 84% increase in EHCPs since 2014. And when you think about that increase in EHCPs, the pressure on schools in that time is like another £5 million of notional funding that schools are expected to find. And I'm not sure that schools, budgets in terms of SEN have gone up that much over that period of time. And I don't know how, in terms of the special needs review, I know that Beck's worked really hard on this, but it's just, in some ways it's easy. We've been through the whole EHCP, issue in Sutton, and now, they're estimating 17 a month, but that's 17 times £6,000 that schools are going to have to be finding every month. And if I talk from personal experience, my EHCPs have doubled in the last 6 months. So, and I've got another 2 children in the offing. So we're talking about another £50,000 of notional budget, which was set on last year's budget that I've got to pay, where already I'm struggling financially. So I don't know how, as a forum, we can maybe help support schools with this challenge. Because, if you look at the amount of notional money that schools are putting into SEN compared to the the actual financial money coming from the SEN part of the school's funding block, obviously schools are bearing the brunt of it on most occasions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and fill that pause if no one else wants to come in response to that comment. I mean, I think, yes, schools are under pressure. As we've talked about, the local authority and the DSG is under pressure as well. And I can assure you, whilst there have been increases in the high needs block, we haven't had 84% increase in the high needs block since 2014 either. So I think we've worked hard to try and make sure that we're thinking of notional funding, thinking of the high needs block as the money that we have as the local area to do the best we possibly can by the young people that we have. And yes, there are pressures across those 2 blocks, if you like, in notional funding and high needs block. But we're trying to think of those as constituent parts of the same budget. So I think the additional predictable needs funding that we've provided that in the context of quite tight budgets, in recognition that we need to try and support mainstream schools if we can. 400k, I realise, isn't a huge amount of money, but it's better than nothing. And I think, part of what the high needs block review, I think, is really saying is that it's not just about the increase in EHCPs, it's actually about the support that we're able to provide that's the most important thing. And therefore, can we move some of the funding that's currently tied up in education, health and care plans and put some of that funding directly into mainstream schools so that they can grow an infrastructure and a capacity to meet those needs, where in some cases, they wouldn't need an EHCP because that support is already there. So it's quite, it's really challenging, really tough. I know you've been with us the whole way, Havard, and I know you're, I think broadly in agreement with the principles, but I don't deny that the practice of this is challenging. Fiona, I don't know if you'd want to come in, or Beck, or anyone else at this point.
I think Beck's got her hand up.
So my microphone driver had a moment's technological problem. Yeah, just to add to that, I agree, it's very difficult, isn't it, with special educational needs. We know across the country that there are increasing demands and strains on anything. But one of the things that's come through very strongly when we've been looking at all the work that there is in Sutton is we still have an unevenness across different schools. And so what we're actually trying to do is make sure that we've got that good practice and that consistency across all schools, and that we've all got a shared understanding, and that will help ease the pressures that are perhaps particularly felt on some schools at the moment. So, quite a number of schools have commented at the variation in terms of people's understanding of what early help is. And of course, the more we can get early help in place, the more we can help students at an early stage. And for many of those children, they may not then need that additional level of support because we've got in early. So there isn't an easy answer. But I think that all of this work is about trying to establish what's good practice, what's consistent good practice across all schools, and making sure that we're sharing that so that we can try and make sure the right support's in place at the right time, and break that connection between the need to have an EHC to get that support. That doesn't mean that children who need support won't have an EHC. It just means that we shouldn't have the two things connected, i.e. if you don't have an EHC, you therefore can't get support. So, Harper's quite right. There is a lot of pressure on all schools and all areas of SEND, but the work of the high needs is trying to address that through that consistency and that growth of practice.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Kieran's right. I have been working with Beck and other people on this since the beginning, and I completely agree. And ultimately, the solution is, looking at how the best of money is distributed, and EHCPs are not the answer to everything. I appreciate there's a whole legal framework and there's a whole pressure here that we have no control over. But I don't want to sound negative. It's just obviously the pressure we have. And I've got full confidence that the work Beck's doing will make a big difference.
Yeah. Beck, do you want to come back? Your hand is up.
More technical problems. We're getting there. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. I can't see any other hand up. So I will therefore assume that the report has been very helpful and has given us a lot of information, but clearly we will have more updates to our future meetings. So thank you very much, everybody. And we'll move on to the targeted youth services. Is Laura doing this, or are you, Kieran?
Could I just put in a request, Chair, that Laura is actually on another call at the moment. She did ask if because we don't quite know how the timings would go. She's going to be available about 8 o'clock. So could we take this item as the next item available after 8 o'clock, if that's possible?
Yes, that's fine. Okay, and so we'll move on to the DSG contribution to children's social care. Is Jonathan available?
Jonathan is unfortunately not available. He's on leave. So I'm going to do my best to step in on his behalf. And it may be that if there are any questions I can't answer, or Fiona or anyone else can't answer, we refer them back to Jonathan. So apologies on his behalf for that. But so this paper relates to a contribution to children's social care from the DSG. The funding comes from the high needs block. So this isn't a decision, strictly speaking, for Forum, but obviously Forum's a consultative body, and we've always talked to Schools Forum about this contribution. Jonathan's been asked to come back to Schools Forum. This will be the second time, I think, or third time he's come back, and then Richard Nash prior to him, just to talk about how this contribution supports the work of children's social care and how it supports young people and education providers in Sutton. Again, I will take the paper as read, so I'm not proposing that I go through the list of social care activities that Jonathan has put there that the contribution supports. We have talked about this previously as a forum. There've been questions about whether do other areas provide contributions to children's social care. I think the discussion last time we were aware that there are other local areas that do this, but it's not completely widespread, and in that sense. I think Forum have wanted to be, or at least wanted to make sure that that the funding does benefit education and the education sector. I won't prejudge whether people feel it does based on the paper that Jonathan has put here, but this contribution has been in place for some time now, and what we've done is we've always come back and had a conversation about it in case the financial position changes or in case people feel differently about this contribution. But just to be clear, it wouldn't be a schools forum decision, it would be a decision from the local authorities. So the recommendation is that that schools forum endorses it, because we do feel that this contribution is important and critical, and there would be consequences if it was removed. What I should probably clarify is, though, that the endorsement is for the ongoing contribution in 2021-22, not 2020-21, as per Jonathan's paper. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions.
Well, I'm sorry he's not here, because I'd like to thank him for producing a much more comprehensive paper than we had initially on this topic. So this is really very helpful indeed. But I think, Beck, it's your hand up, so I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's just two things. When we looked at this last year, and again, you're absolutely right, Chair, it's much more detailed than anything we've had in the past.
Yeah.
We did ask for much more specifics on. This is very much about the general things that the service is doing across all things, some of which are statutory, so won't be supported by this particular funding. And what we did ask last year, from memory, was that we could see particularly what things were happening because of this funding that otherwise would not be. So it'd be very interesting if the next time we get a report, we could actually have that. The other thing I think to note is that there's a number of projects here. Change Up project is one of them. And one of the things that's come out through the high needs review has been how there's different services, because we've got targeted youth service, now we've got the social care, and then there's other people as well, where we've got different projects working with children. One of the things that we've said is it would be very, very good to try and get a joined up services project, rather than having separate projects which often overlap and target the same group of children. And one of the recommendations for the SCMH group is that they actually look at that, and over time try and through that group get that happening. Now, I don't think they're in a position to say that's going to happen for next year. So, I think the funding is as the funding is, but longer term, there should be an overseeing and a trying to merge together so that funding directly targets in a way which benefits educational provision. That's it.
No, I agree with that. So I would have thought Fiona would be the officer who would make sure that this was coordinated. I might be wrong. Fiona, do you want to have a view on that?
Sorry, Brenda, you just broke up at that moment. Could you just repeat that?
I think Beck's point is important, and we've discussed this many times, that there are different groups looking at different aspects, and it really needs to be pulled together as the funding will decrease as we go forward. So I thought maybe you, in your post, might be the officer who would oversee this and make sure it is joined up.
Yes, I'm very happy to do that, and I think that's a lot of the work that we're already trying to do. So it's a continuation, but you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that it is all joined up and it's clear where services are being used, that there isn't duplication, but equally that there aren't sort of gaps between services that mean some children end up with no service at all. So yes, very happy to take that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Nathan, you have a hand up.
Yeah, just to agree with Beck on both her points. Obviously, we raised this last year, and I think the trouble is if it only comes up annually, then it's very difficult to do anything other than say that this has been almost expected. I don't mean that in a nasty way, but the money is almost expected. It's been built in. It's almost structural. And as Kieran said, some local authorities do this, but it's not typical practice. And the impact on education and what wouldn't be happening otherwise is not particularly clear. And so I'd just repeat my request from a year ago that is clearer before we come to the point of having to re-agree it. And would suggest that probably be better early in the next calendar year at a midpoint.
I was just going to say, would it be helpful if I asked Jonathan to look at what he's given us this time, and just to sort of reduce that down into the specifics that this funding is actually paying, and as you say, so what are the outcomes as a result? And then we could perhaps bring that back to the next forum. Would that be helpful?
Nathan?
Yes, please. Yeah. That would be helpful. The impact on education. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I would agree. I think that would be, a good thing for us to see. So thank you. Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this? Okay. So what we're being asked to do is to, as Kieran read out initially, we're recommended to note the report and endorse the ongoing contribution for 21-22, I think, with a further report to be provided as we've just agreed. But this one will be an interim one, I think we're saying at our next meeting. Is everyone content? Okay, so we'll now, it's not 8 o'clock yet, is it? No, not 8 o'clock yet. So we'll take item 8. So that's over to Joe and Bob. Who's going to start?
I'll start, Chair. Thank you. And then we'll do a double act, I'm sure, as the agenda item moves on. So thank you, Chair, and good evening, colleagues. I appreciate this is my first Schools Forum meeting since I've been in place, and I'm pleased to be here and to talk to the paper that we've submitted. As the Chair has said, we'll work on the assumption that everybody's read it, but I did want to just take a moment to highlight some of the key pieces of delivery that Cognos staff have provided, certainly during the most extraordinary term of our second lockdown period. We're grateful to colleagues at schools who have effected fantastic partnership work with us that has really, really helped us with our endeavours with school. And our work has continued, and that's continued with the necessary risk assessments and checks in place, with the vast majority of our work still continuing face-to-face, but some teams really using technology creatively, particularly, most notably, the therapies team and EdSite team, who have used technology in a way that children have found really, really helpful and accessible. Our work with vulnerable families has continued with officers going above and beyond, visiting families, as I know school colleagues do, to make sure that they are coping and able to deliver school packages to those families. Our numbers of elective home education and those who are receiving education other than at school have spiked. It's a national piece at the moment, but in Sutton our numbers have increased significantly. So we've deployed staff accordingly to ensure that we are able to maintain oversight of those young people and work closely with colleagues in other agencies, our schools, early help and social care. SEND have continued to work hard with schools and families, with 100% of our EHCPs being completed in a 20-week timescale, despite the challenges that COVID have brought us and pressures on all of our partners. Our virtual school, working alongside our children looked after, will be delivering their annual report next month, and some highlights of that really stand out insofar as results. I know this summer was an exceptional summer, but results were really good at both GCSE and A-level, where we've got a number of children who are now going on to university in record numbers, who are care leavers who are currently studying at university, as well as those moving on to college and into work. We've also delivered our first National Coffee Morning for foster carers and continue to deliver training for schools during the lockdown period to ensure that we are providing the best possible support for our children look after. And in addition to that, our safeguarding team on top of their usual case work, are supporting our schools, and actually only this week delivered safeguarding training to over 100 primary designated safeguarding leads. The examples I've given are just a flavour of the work that we're delivering. There's been a number of challenges for everybody this year, but I think there's also a significant amount of reason for optimism. We've been embarking on a business planning period for the 27 services and are currently in discussions with London Borough of Sutton around our recommissioning of our services to agree the priorities and KPIs, and we've indicated that within our paper. So really happy to take questions, and Bob is alongside me this evening as well to respond to anything you wanted to discuss.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a very full report. Thank you very much. And again, before I just open this up, I wonder if I can just look at item 311 and 12, which are the two items you've asked us to be particularly aware of. And for new members, could I just ask the end of 311, where you say we welcome the opportunity to work collaboratively with education reps through involvement at the Cognos board, and I wonder if you could just say a bit more who you mean by that, because not all of us are familiar with that setup.
Yes, of course. And actually, it was one of the points that I wanted to make sure that we talked to this evening. As colleagues may or may not be aware, we're moving forward with our discussions with London Borough of Sutton around our ownership and governance. And there is now the opportunity for more representatives from our school colleagues to sit on our board. So LBS and indeed Fiona or Kieran may wish to speak to that, but we'll be in contact with colleagues in order to invite expressions of interest to join our board. And Jenny, who sits here tonight, is an example of that. But that's what that reference means within the report.
Okay, Kieran, do you want to help us out here? Because not all of us are familiar with this setup.
Yeah. So as Joe said, so the previous governance arrangements were such that there were A shareholders and B shareholders. A shareholder was the council, B shareholders was 24 schools, I think it was, but not all schools across the borough. And I think following a decision from the People Committee, we wanted to, and following some recommendations actually from the independent expert that came in to advise us on this, as well as what we've been doing in SEN, there was a recommendation to try and simplify those governance arrangements. I think a lot of people felt they perhaps weren't working as well as they might or as they were originally intended, and a simplification of that governance arrangement would be welcome. What I think Joe's alluding to is that we didn't want that to water down or change the influence that schools would have and can have on the services that Cognos provide. There still needs to be a voice for schools, even if they're not shareholders. So I think the proposal is to try and invite some representatives onto the board from the schools community, so to facilitate that.
Sorry, Brenda, you broke up a bit there. Can I just clarify, Kieran? You said expressions of interest, but my understanding was that it would be the schools, groups, etc., who would be nominating. Expressions of interest sounds to me like you'll be having some filtering aspect to it, in which case that was the discussion or the agreement that we had originally.
Did I say expressions of interest? I don't recall saying expressions of interest, but I think you're... You
didn't, but Joanne Cassie did.
Oh, okay. I think I don't think we're in the place where we've sort of written out and defined the process that will take place, but I think we all are clear that we would expect the school sector to decide who they would wish to be on that board rather than us running a process. We're certainly not going to, take, I don't think, expressions of interest where we're, judging whether people should or shouldn't join the board. In much the same way that I think representatives are nominated and voted on to schools forum from the school sector, I think we'd expect a similar kind of process for the Cognos board. How that process runs exactly is something that we'd probably ask schools to think about rather than want to define ourselves.
Thanks, that's reassuring. Well, I need to say that's reassuring, because if it isn't like that, it would undermine every 3-hour conversation I previously had about it. So I hope that's the way it goes.
Yeah, can I just come back in and clarify? It might have been a clunky turn of phrase, expressions of interest, but just to be clear, it is London Borough of Sutton's responsibility to reach out to schools who would then put forward whoever it is that they wish to sit on the board. It is for the school to self-select, if you like, expressions of interest, self-select. But I think the main point I'm trying to make is building on the strong partnership working that we enjoy with our schools. We're looking forward to working with them further. Thank you.
That's fine. And Jenny, as you were referred to, do you want to have any comment to make about this? I'm not sure Jenny can hear me.
She can. Well, she was shaking her head, Chair. So that was a no from Jenny.
Thank you very much. Sue, I think you have your hand up. Sue Smith, that is.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brenda. Just to reiterate and agree with what Carol was saying, obviously having been in the meetings, or some of the meetings where there were the changes proposed and agreed, we are also, and can I say, Brenda, although I do sit here as a representative of Sutton Teachers Committee, I would like to speak just for this minute as with my governor hat on, and just to say we also would be looking not just from the schools, but also from the governor group, or that was my understanding, that it could come across from the schools community, if you like, would be from the education professionals, head teachers or workers, as well as governors, so that Kieran is, or whoever is going to be working with the LA on that, it also needs to come to talk via the governors.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. So I assume then that there are no B shareholders, but there's just one board now, and you're going to have different ways of recruiting people to that main board. Okay, fine. Do you want to come back, Carol? Your hand is up.
No, that's because I haven't taken my hand down, Brenda. I'm all done with it, frankly.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So, are there any questions or comments for Joanna? Bob, do you want to come in at all?
No, not necessarily, Brenda. I think Joe covered it nicely. I think just to reiterate, I think what Kieran and Joe was saying, and to give Carolyn comfort and Sue that comfort, it is for the school community to effectively come together and nominate representatives from the 3 sectors, i.e. secondary, primary and the specialist provision, and there will be conversations with London Borough of Sutton about how schools want to do that, so that there's certainly no intention to choose or to be a selection panel, nothing like that at all. It is schools to come up with their proposed members of the Cognos board.
Thank you very much, Bob. I saw Sharon's hand up, but it's gone again. Sharon.
Yeah, sorry, Brenda. Just a quick question, really. In Appendix 2, where we've got the service name and where the income comes from, like the DSG, and the KPIs, the sort of the heat map. Just an observation, really, that some of the comments against the RAG rating, it doesn't really give us an indication of the impact. So I'm just, for instance, Travellers, where it says doing well, supporting all families and prioritising safeguarding concerns as well as learning outcomes. It doesn't really give us any indication of what the impact of that's been. And I think there's a couple of those where it would be better to have a little bit more information around the impact of that spend.
No, I'm certainly happy to take that away, and we can represent that at the next meeting, because I absolutely take your point. What's really important is to demonstrate the impact of the activity.
Are you okay with that, Sharon?
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you. So if there's no other comment or questioning for Joanna, I'll thank you again for a very comprehensive report, and welcome to the forum. So thank you. I think we could now, Kieran, try to see if Laura is available.
So I'm just looking on the list, Chair. Laura hasn't joined yet. She's in another meeting, which is difficult to abruptly end. So
that's fine.
Can I suggest we go to the next one and then she'll join when she can?
That's absolutely fine. So we'll go on to the support for the fair access protocol.
Sorry, Chair. I've just seen that Bob's just sent a note that Matthew's had his hand up. Is he? I can't see it, Bob, that Matthew's got a hand up. I can't hear you, Bob.
It might be Fiona then.
Oh, Fiona, have you've got your hand? Okay, it's gone down.
Sorry, everyone. Sorry.
Yeah, someone is the blank backgrounds, but yeah.
That's right. Okay, so we're looking at enclosure 9, which is the support for the fair access protocol, and I note, Kieran, that you're saying that it's not a request for additional budget per se. So
yeah,
it probably follows lots of spending requests, even though. Carry on.
Yeah. So apologies for the typo in the title as well. Obviously it's December 2020, not January 2020, but
yeah.
So this item relates to the fair access protocol that we have in the borough. It's a conversation that's been ongoing, I think, with secondary heads for a while now, and some of the pressures that are on the fair access protocol currently. Mm-hmm. I will ask, Nathan or Peter or anyone else from the secondary community to comment on this, because I know in many ways they've been involved in these conversations more than I have. But I mean, just by way of background, so a fair access protocol, for anyone who's not aware, is a process by, or a protocol that ensures that all schools in an area take a fair and balanced approach when admitting vulnerable children, including those that might have challenging behaviour. I think it can also be used for in-year admissions as well, where there are difficulties in finding vacancies, but it's not its primary purpose for that. So the paper, in many ways, I guess, raises awareness amongst forum about some of the pressures on the fair access protocol, and there is a request for potentially some funding support from secondary heads on this to support the protocol, given some of the pressures that are set out in the report. So the challenges are set out in paragraph 3. And then they come on to, or the paper comes on to what the requests are. So essentially, we're looking at or exploring the idea of using some growth funding to support new arrival placements who meet specific criteria through the protocol. And this is down to the fact that there are very few available places in secondary schools, particularly so in years 8 to 10 currently. And with a number of schools not able to place those pupils, that puts pressure on the system, and it makes it difficult for schools to accommodate when they're full. So under paragraph 4, whilst we haven't put a necessary figure to it, there is a request from secondary heads for potentially some funding support under 4A. And it's that I was commenting on earlier on in the agenda, that I think if that is to be funded, would probably be rightly funded from growth funding in the schools block. 4B is really highlighting a likely overspend issue. And again, I touched on this earlier on in the agenda under my introductory comments on the budget next year. But there's a budget of 100k for year 11 placements. it's a budget that's been overspent, certainly for the last 2 or 3 years. And I think whilst this is funding from the high needs block, I think we're likely to have to consider increasing that budget next year, but that wouldn't be necessarily a decision for Schools Forum. Item C relates to funding to support short-term alternative provision. Now, that's the one there isn't funding required for that one. It's to raise awareness that work is ongoing, and that there is already, we would fund any activity in category C through the existing funding we have in AP in the high needs block anyway. So, but it's to raise awareness about that work as well. So I think from Schools Forum perspective, I think strictly speaking, the decision is whether there should be any funding from the schools block to support category A funding. I'm happy to hear comments or views on whether we should increase a year 11 placements budget in the high needs block as well, of course, and any other comments or questions about category C as well. But I mean, Pete, Nathan, Beck, or anyone else that represents secondary, I don't know if I've fairly summarised the issue or not, so I'll ask you to make a comment if necessary.
I think first of all, Kieran, just a big thank you for putting this together, particularly at a time when I know that there are very many competing demands on your time, and I know that secondary head colleagues will be very grateful that this paper has been written and presented to Schools Forum, because it shows that the views of the secondary head community are being taken seriously, and so first of all, just appreciation. It's very thorough. However, I think knowing your own limits is important, and knowing my own limits, I'm going to ask Peter and or Beck as to whether they have anything particular they would want to add in support of the secondary heads in particular.
Thank you, Nathan. I mean, we are in support of it. It's just that the reason being is really because the complex nature of some of the FAPs that are now coming through. And we're not talking about the FAPs that come back from the lines. They are very well supported. But you know what this paper is hopefully supporting is those FAPs who are coming through, who've had often numerous schools and a very interesting background, and the amount of invested time and energies to get those when their kids come into school is massive. And we really could do is to support with those children, because they absorb all the attentions that we have and resource. So I'm very much in favour of any resources to support the FAPs.
Beck, do you want to come in?
Is that me? I think just to echo that, one of the things that came through from the SEMH group when they were looking at things was the recognition that, and again, we'll just put those that come from the limes to one side, but the high levels of mental health needs that were coming through with some of these children, and the stresses and strains that therefore puts on a successful integration. So the things that are written here very much reflect that recognition that there are some very complex children out there that are moving between schools, do come in often and don't have a school place, or have been out of school for a period of time, and all that does take resource and attention, and anything that helps with that I think would be very much appreciated.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else wish to have a view on this? Kieran, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it's a question really. I mean, we under category A, I just wonder whether people agree with paragraph, in principle at least, with paragraph 7 to 11 in terms of, well, one, using growth funding, but also having to have some sort of criteria around it to, you know, and I know people don't like the perverse incentive, because that implies, you know, people not doing things in a way that we would normally expect them to. No, it's not meant that way, but there is a potential perverse incentive there, such that a criteria would be necessary. And I think the one that we've been thinking is that the school would have to request that they and demonstrate that they are full to capacity based on the original plan in that year group, and that should include bulge provision. Because to be honest, there is a slight concern on our part that schools can cap PANs and can cap who they take in a way that they choose, not based on the original planned admission number for that particular year group. And I don't know if that's something that's going to be an issue for colleagues or not, but it's in there and I wanted to flag it so that it's not overlooked.
Nathan, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't put my hand up, so anyway. I think the criteria is perfectly understandable. I think there are lots of reasons why it's very difficult to integrate children in particular year groups at particular curriculum points. There isn't really just a kind of capping of the PAN, particularly given that schools obviously attract on extra funding from extra pupils eventually, even if it's not in that particular year. So I think perhaps the criteria itself might need, or the criteria themselves might need a little bit more thought, but I absolutely agree with the notion of a set of criteria.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. That's useful.
Okay, Kieran. So, what do you suggest we do on this? You work with the secondary heads on producing that on the principles. We're in favour of it in principle. Is that sufficient?
I think so. I mean, Peter Gasparelli, who it's kind of you to say, Nathan, but I should say it's Peter Gasparelli that's done the vast majority of this work for the report. So it's any plaudits go to him. He's going to be taking some of this forward, and I'm sure we'll be liaising with secondary heads on it. I think if we've got to steer that in principle, Schools Forum are happy to use some growth funding in the way that's described in paragraphs 7 to 11, subject to some amendments to precise criteria, then I think that gives Peter enough to go on. And then I think it would be a discussion possibly back at secondary heads to dot the I's and cross the T's.
Okay, are we content with that way forward, everyone? Nathan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, absolutely content. Just to say thanks for the clarification, Kieran. And I know that Peter and the admissions team are also under a lot of pressure as a result having to make changes and various things up to the 10th of December. So if we could note the secondary heads, thanks to Peter for putting that report together, particularly in quite short order, because I know you only came to our meeting a few weeks ago.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you. So we'll now move off that paper and go. I can see Laura, so we can take Laura's paper. And Laura, welcome to the meeting. And just to let you know that we've taken the format that everyone has read the papers that they've had before them. So if you want to just highlight anything, please go ahead.
Okay, hi, thanks everyone. Apologies for being late. I was actually in a family restorative justice meeting. You've read the paper itself. I think this is the third year that we have been running this alongside schools. This year, as I'm sure you'd be aware, it's been quite different, just in terms of the numbers and the huge challenges that schools are under, with lots of pupils not being in school for some of that time, some being in school. So the impact in terms of our work continued. It was, as much as possibly we could. We did risk rate most of our cases and those that we still wanted to see face-to-face in a safe way. So lots of young people were still seen face-to-face. If you can see on page 2, that was just the numbers that went through. We had 23 this year. And within that, pleased to say 83% remained in mainstream to this day. Again, we do go on a kind of a very crass cost formation on this. I know, and we all know, that not all of those students would have most definitely gone on to being permanently excluded from school just because of the support they were getting. But it gives you kind of a rough estimate. We have to, I mean, I like to estimate it and guesstimate it so you can kind of have a rough idea of the savings that potentially could have been made. The other thing that we've worked really well with on schools, and I know it is difficult, and it's interesting getting on the back of that last point, there are a lot of far more challenging young people coming into the borough. Certainly I've seen with my social care hat on as well. All of the students that were permanently excluded, were very early on, within kind of 3 months of the work. It is a challenge to build a persistent and consistent relationship with a child to enable behaviour change in a short time, and we all know that, and we all do our best. So it is, it's understandable that some we can't reach. The other thing is the Year 6 project, transition project. We're actually going to be doing some work, hopefully, across the partnership to further embed our work with Year 7s. I know that Cheam High actually are one of the pilots for that, which starts in a week or two. We worked with 25 this year. They came into Sutton Youth Centre. It wasn't virtual. We did it all face-to-face. As you would expect, as you would hope, they are all still in mainstream. What was interesting, when I looked at last year's cohorts, you can see that 4 had been excluded, but there's still a larger number that hadn't. So there's just a couple of other things that we do within integrated youth services on top of the youth offending team and the edge of care work, which is the Youth in Crime Prevention and the I'm Doing Me project, which schools can all access. And I think for me, it was just to highlight is we don't have, in terms of that commissioned piece of work, kind of a number to work with. We have the Year 6 transition project, but whether or not it was something that the forum felt you wanted us to look at was a specific number that you would want in kind of value for money type arrangement for the next year going forward. I know it'd be difficult to kind of discuss in detail here and now and agree, but I'd be happy to work with the chair of the VPP to see whether or not, in agreement with other heads, we could look at how many you would want and that equilibrium, I suppose, across the schools in terms of access. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Thank you. I don't know whether that's Beck or Peter with hand up.
It's me again, I'm afraid.
Okay, Beck.
3 things. One, which I say every time, which is, and Laura knows what I'm going to say, it's very difficult to estimate how many of these children would or wouldn't go. And that's not to take away from the work that's being done. It's just that I think we need to take any figures with a pinch of salt. Secondly, one of the things, again, and we talked about this earlier, Laura, but you won't have heard it, is that, again, when we talk about transition projects, there's lots of different people doing lots of different transition projects. And again, what we need to do is to try and get that all joined up so that we have the strengths of Laura's team and the strengths of social care team and the strengths of people that are working very much from the education base, that all of those things can actually be covered. And that's, again, one of the recommendations that's been made. And the last thing is just a query. On your 2 tables that you show on page 30.
Page 30, sorry, I haven't. Yeah, the 2 tables, I know, yep.
So you've got, in the first table, you've got 7 children excluded within 3 months, then 6, and a total of 13. Yeah?
Yeah.
And on the table below, you've got 4, 2, and then it's 4. Is it 4 or 6?
Ah, yes, sorry. That was when that editing went through. That would be, if I work on the percentage, I know the percentage is correct. So I'd have to have a look at that percentage and I can work that out for you. Sorry, bear with me. Do you want me to work that out now? Can I come back on that, Beck?
Your percentage is comparable with the 4, but it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense with your table above, there's something wrong with the figures. So it's really whether it's 4 or 6.
It would be 4. If the percentage makes it 4, the percentage is correct. When it was formatted and sent, it must have changed. The percentage is correct.
Okay, it's just that it's inconsistent with your table above, that's all.
Yeah, I can see that. So it must be that changed when it was formatted. So I can get that omitted. So it would be 4. On your point, Beck, around the transition project, just to make a point, I mean, it's interesting you say there's a lot of transition projects. I certainly know that when I speak to the primary heads or some of the leads in the primary schools, I don't get the impression that they feel that there is a lot of transition project work like we do. I don't know whether they feel that there is and that there's lots of different ones going on. I don't get that impression. Beck, that there's lots of other, I might be wrong, and there might be lots of other things that happen in year 6 and in the summer holidays. But I do feel that this project is a bit standalone. I don't think there is much work that happens how we do it. I don't know, I might be wrong.
Yeah, I'm probably not quite right to say transition focused, absolutely, but there's lots of other interventions going on from different agencies that target the year 6 and the year 7, not necessarily following from one to the rest. But what I'm trying to say is that when we've looked at this as a group in the SEOH group, and actually it probably is worth getting in touch with them, because probably you ought to be part of that group. But anyway, it's something that's come through quite clearly, is that we're not joined up enough across the different services, and we're not taking the strengths across that different group and making it a more holistic approach to some of these very difficult, complex cases. And that includes some of those that perhaps aren't engaging with your team, but we might be able to pull in through other routes, and then that gives you access to work with them in a way which at the moment I know you've got some that just won't engage with your particular team on their own.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. If there's other things going on, very happy to be part of that, so that can be more joined up. But I don't know who leads on that SEMH group, but more than happy to.
Helen Gasparelli.
Helen, okay, yeah. There's something coming up actually around that. Yeah, we weren't involved. I don't think it was last year, but we're certainly involved with Helen at the moment around that transitions work.
Okay. Anyone else? Any comments, questions to Laura? No? Okay. All right. So let's look at the recommendation. What we're asking for on the back page, for the work to be recommissioned to the amount of 110,000, acknowledging some of the excellent outcomes achieved and the value for money element. So are we content recommission this work to that amount of money? Are we content? Okay, I'm taking silence as content. So thank you very much. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for your report, and best of luck with your work.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Bye, Laura.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to I think we're on to early years now. And I think that it's you again, Kieran.
You sound disappointed, Brenda.
No, I'm just saying it's another piece of work for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, in many ways, this is Laura's piece of work, not mine. But I'm happy to cover it. So this relates to funding allocations for early years providers. As a result of COVID, there's been a couple of adjustments to the methodology by which we have been paying early years providers. As a sector, everyone's been hit, haven't they? But as a sector, the early years sector has been hit in particular by COVID, and we ran a consultation to make some of these proposals that we were putting in place temporarily permanent. The quickest way to describe it is, rather than paying our PVIs at the end of the month, we're going to pay them at the start of the month, because that helps them from a cash flow perspective. So we consulted on that, and as you can see in the report, 54 responses and 96% of respondents came back in favour of the proposal. So unless there's any compelling reasons why we shouldn't proceed with that proposal, that's what we are proposing to do. The other recommendation is to flag that we intend to allocate any underspend on the early years DSG allocation to all early years providers based on the actual autumn term free childcare entitlement take up data, which will be coming in the spring term. So funding for early years is quite complicated in the sense that you get a provisional allocation in December, but the actual budget changes throughout the year, basically based on termly adjustments to take up, and it's usually the case that we have some underspend at the end of the year. And I think Laura in this paper is estimating that the underspend is going to be in the order of about 300k. And the reason we can make this recommendation is because the government has changed the funding methodology, which will give us more security over our budget estimates, because we're running it off actual data as opposed to normal times when we're always running it off estimates and then having to adjust later. Now, we do have a requirement to pass through 95% of the income we get in the early years block through to providers. So all we're really proposing to do is provide that additional funding now, rather than having to wait to the end of the financial year. Sue, who has a slightly better handle on this than me, that's a fair summary of what Laura's getting at in this paper, isn't it?
Yes, I think the difference is for this year only. The autumn term is actually based on January 2020 data, where in the usual methodology is that the autumn term is funded based on the following January's data. So we don't know till the end of the year. So we haven't got certainty whether there's any underspend, but because we're certain of the funding this year, we can determine whether there is any surplus there. And because, as Kieran said, early years providers are struggling like a lot this year. So we'd like to actually give them the benefit of that underspend if there is some.
Can I just come in there just as well, just because our PVI early years rep, Vicky, did email me to say she was having technical difficulties getting into the meeting. So just for the record, she has emailed me to say that she's very supportive of the paper, that she's very appreciative of the work that Laura's been doing, and the council, the support that the council has provided, and she'd just like to be kept informed and updated. So I thought I should make that clear, given that Vicky can't be here.
Yeah, thank you. I was just about to ask if we'd heard from her, so thank you. You've answered that question. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this to either Sue or Kieran? No? Okay. So can I ask you to agree the recommendations in 2.1 and 2.2, please? Thank you, Bob, for letting me know you've left the meeting. Right, so I'm taking silence as approval of the recommendations as set out in 2.1 and 2.2. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that paper. And we will now move on to the capital report. Kieran.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, this is our standard capital report that we provide to Forum. It provides where we are with our capital programme across basic need as well as capital maintenance. So the local authority administers capital maintenance funding for maintained schools. Obviously, academies get their own capital maintenance funding through the Condition Improvement Fund. Not obviously that, but that is the case. And what we do is just share where we are with our capital program. So as you can see, 1.1, very little change in terms of the overall expansion program, because we're largely through our expansion program. There's some explanations for the minor adjustments in paragraph 1.2 there. We don't know where, well, in terms of the secondary free school, Greenshaw Secondary Free School, colleagues will be aware that was subject to a planning inquiry which took place during the pandemic, but was delayed from March until September. The DFE, the last we heard from the DFE was that we were expecting the Secretary of State to determine the outcome of that planning inquiry in February next year. So we have an uncommitted capital balance of 16 million, of which 1.7 million is in the Special Provision Fund. Obviously, we don't want to do too much with that funding until we know what the outcome of the free school proposal is. And with respect to the Special Provision Grant, we're very keen to try and deploy that funding in support of the High Needs Block Review, where deployment of that funding would support the strategic aims and objectives of that review. So, you know, it could be adaptations to existing schools to facilitate inclusion or associated activities. So we need to get around to that, but and I'm hoping to be able to get around to that certainly next year. In terms of capital maintenance, we run a process each year. Richard and colleagues join us on the asset management panel, and we run through all of the bids that we get in from maintained schools. Havard's on that as well. I'm not going to list everyone, but we have met as an asset management steering group, and we've agreed a draft programme, which leaves us still with an unallocated contingency of 400k, which is good to cover off any emergency condition issues throughout the year. As is the case, it tends to be that the capital works actually take place over the summer holiday period, or most of them do anyway. So that will run through next year. Secondary provision I've mentioned on. With respect to this forthcoming academic year, we've now agreed the additional places that we think we're going to need for September 2021 in lieu of the delays to the free school. So we'll be providing additional places at the schools listed in paragraph 3.2, and obviously growth funding will go to those schools as discussed previously in the agenda. Primary schools, we're not expanding any more primary schools. In fact, we're getting to the point now where we're approaching falling roles in the primary sector with reductions in the birth rates. So we are expecting a reduction in applications for September 2021, and that conversation has started with primary heads. We are likely to need to take some places out of the primary sector to make sure that the system is, efficient and viable, and schools aren't left with too many vacant places, which is obviously very difficult to deal with in these financial times, at least anyway. So that's it, I think, from on the capital side.
Okay, Sue Smith, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Brenda. I know this isn't a pupil place paper, but you have mentioned the secondary and the primary places to a certain extent. Kieran, could you just give us a quick update on anything on the new special school provision that you were looking at, a sort of extra or a new build for, in effect, Carew? Could you give us a very quick where we are with that?
Yeah, sure. Very similar to the Sutton Free School 1 and 2, the Greenshaw Free School was subject to a planning inquiry. The planning inquiry was heard a little bit later than the Sutton Free School 1 and 2 project. It was the end of September. It's similar timelines in terms of when we're expecting to hear from the Secretary of State as to whether that proposal will proceed or not. It'll be January, February time next year. If that's the case, if they proceed, then it won't. Well, Carew has grown in a number of places during the time that the free school proposal has been in the offing, so it won't increase the size of the school than what it is currently. Is the point I think I'm trying to make.
Lovely. Well, thanks for that, Kieran. Thank you. Thanks, Brenda.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to make any comments or questions on any aspect of Kieran's paper, including the appendix? No, I can't see any hands up. So, can I ask you to agree the recommendations in the report, and in particular to approve the draft capital maintenance programme for 21-22? The other items are for noting. Are we content? Okay, no hands, so I'm taking that as approved. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. In terms of confidentiality, I think we do not have anything in particular that would be deemed to come under that heading. In terms of AOB, Kieran, you want to come back to talk about COVID?
Yes, thank you, Brenda. This is, well, it will become clear that this isn't entirely thought through, but I wanted to raise a question with Forum about COVID and some of the pressures that schools are under, and whether we should consider any funding support to schools where a significant number of staffing absences are requiring schools to take very difficult decisions. The concern I have is that a number of schools will dismiss bubbles due to public health reasons and because they're advised to dismiss bubbles, but we also know that some schools have started to think about whether they're going to have to dismiss bubbles because they simply can't afford the agency cover because of the number and percentage of staff absences that they cover, and that's the scenario that I'm particularly concerned about. Now, the government has provided some funding support for general COVID costs, but that at the moment only covered March to July, and at the moment they have indicated that there will be some funding support for schools with high levels of staff absences, but the thresholds are very, very high. And they haven't published the detailed guidance yet. So I'd be interested to hear views on whether, and it would be growth funding or schools block funding I think we'd need to use, but if there would be any support for something like that, I think the criteria would have to be very, very carefully thought through for all sorts of obvious reasons. I think one of the criteria would probably have to be those schools that are in deficit already, or probably would have to be those schools that are in deficit already, but I realise that is potentially difficult as a criteria. But I was wondering whether, not that we need necessarily a full formula review group meeting, but a group of some description that might be willing to come together and just consider it. If Forum feels like they don't want to consider it, that's fine as well, but I'd just like to raise the possibility.
Well, clearly this would be a very complex formula to come up with, but I think this is Beck or Peter have hand up.
Probably a bit of a combination, but I think this is a lovely thought, but it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's also an open-ended commitment, and it's coming directly out of an area where we've already said that there's other pressures on this. So personally, I'm not sure that this is the answer. The other problem is that the solution would be to get in agency staff. Now, absorbing the odd member of agency staff into your school structure and still managing to take things forward is possible. If you've got a lot of staff out, it actually in itself becomes really difficult to do because they don't know the structures, they don't know the children, they don't know the system. So I'm not sure that just having a physical person in front of a class necessarily covers the issue, that the regular teachers who know the children and everything else will be there. And as I said, it's a very, very expensive model to actually run, because you're talking, you know, hundreds of pounds a day in order to keep one school open, and how many are you going to have in that area? But other people may have different views.
Well, I have a similar view to Bet, but I'm open to others. Please come in with your thoughts.
Can I?
Nathan.
Thanks. I actually have a different AOB, but I agree with I agree with Beck. I think if any head teacher heard Kieran speak, they'd be really pleased to think that there are officers in the local authority that are thinking along these lines. But I also think that one of the reasons why the DFE has set the kind of high thresholds that they have is to ensure that claims are made where they're needed. And I think it becomes much more difficult in the local area. Whether there are other ways of supporting schools, I don't know. But I think it's a laudable thought. I agree with Beck that it comes to a point where inducting agency staff into a school structure is the real problem rather than the cash, notwithstanding the fact that I'm burning £50 notes on the gas bill at the moment. And you know, our gas bill last month was double that it was last year. But it must be like that for all of us. And I think it would be very difficult for you to have the amount of money that would be needed, to be honest.
Yeah. Emma, did you have your hand up? Do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's even more for primary schools. It's even more than just with teachers. What we're struggling with is support staff as well, because the bubbles are so tight with only 30 children. You're stretched to capacity, and for us at the moment, 6 members of staff off today, trying to keep the children supervised even at lunchtime and break time is just a nightmare. So I do agree that it's a nice thought, but it is such a complex issue for us, you know, for where the money's going and how to actually cover it. It's, you know, I think Havard would agree that it is just a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, Havard, do you want to come in?
Try again with the mic on. It's a lovely sentiment, but I think in some ways it could be counterproductive, because if you're saying it's schools that are struggling financially and in deficit, they're probably the schools that have struggled through without getting supply teachers and therefore wouldn't be able to apply. And other schools that maybe have got the money have gone, well, we can afford to put supplies in. So you could almost potentially be paying the schools that have got more money than the schools that haven't. Because certainly when I had like 3 reception staff out, you know, my Senko was covering, we were just covering internally because we haven't got the money for supplies.
Yeah. Nathan, your hand is still up. Do you want to come back?
No,
or is it
so I'll
just...
wait until this one's finished.
Okay. I think, Kieran, I might be wrong, but I think we're concluding that it's a lovely idea, but it is far too complicated and likely to be unaffordable to do.
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate the feedback.
Okay. All right. So, Nathan, please raise your other AOB.
It's a request, Chair, if I may. I think as a member of Forum, I'm always grateful when these meetings are in person that they begin at 6:30, and it allows me to get over to Cheam to be on time. Kieran will know that he and I first met this morning at 7:30, and so, you know, kind of 13 and a half hours later, I find myself still in the meeting and I haven't eaten yet. Could we please consider the timing of Forum? If it's to be virtual in February, it needs to take the time it takes. That's not a criticism of the length of the meeting, but maybe when we don't have to take into account travelling time I can see colleagues still in offices who will be back in offices at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not sure that's in the best interest of their well-being.
Yes, I think that's a very good idea. As you say, we've had to build in travelling time when we're meeting physically. So I think that's a very good idea. So we can look into that, ready for the next meeting. And I think we're doing reasonably well, considering that we had a shaky start. Carol.
Yeah, what exactly are you talking about in terms of potentially revising the time, Chair? Because whilst I don't work in a school, I am knocking out about 10 to 12-hour days at the moment, so I wouldn't be in a position to do much earlier, frankly.
Could you cope with 6 o'clock, Carol? I know it's not that much earlier, but could you cope with 6 o'clock?
I imagine.
Okay, so yes. For people who don't work in schools, that probably would be the earliest, I guess, colleagues could make. So
any adjustment would be appreciated. As I say, the secondary head started at 7:30 this morning, and so I think that the local authority would want to think it was thinking about the whole forum, or we start at 6:30 and we cap the time.
Yeah. This was likely to be one of the longer agendas. So, and as I've already said, we had a late start because of the technical difficulties. So normally we're done within 2 hours. But let's have a go at 6 o'clock for our February meeting. Okay. Any other business from anyone? No, that's fine. So all I can do is direct you to the suggestions for our, not the suggestions, well, I think we've already agreed these dates, the 24th of February and the 22nd of June for next year. And to note the next meeting of the People Committee is the 10th of December. So I will, on that basis, thank you all very much indeed for taking part and for all of your long days of work. And look forward to seeing you in February, and I hope you have a good Christmas.
Yes,
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.